那个我们就继续来学习这个 Visual Studio 部署 Solidity 合约啊，这个弄一个离线环境，就是 Visual Solidity 加 Python，然后用我们离线的编译器啊。我们那天不是学到一半嘛，我们把这个 Visual Studio 打开，然后打开那个就是还在原来的这个文件里，它默认会，如果你没找到，用 File Open 把之前的那个文件夹打开就可以了。我们在这里面把那个 Simple Store 回顾一下，把那个 Simple Storage 这个合约复制过来了，然后在这边有一个 Deploy，写一个底层的基础的啊，这个包括这个 Compile 的 Soul 啊，这个东西很基础，我们也不用太纠结，把了解了一下底层就可以了，然后我们继续回头这个学完我们就学那个有一个叫 Brownie 的这个 Python 开发的一个插件啊，就熟悉这个叫熟悉这个 Visual Studio 的过程啊。好，
code and the ABI. The ABI we can
继续看这个视频啊，YouTube 这个Beginner to Expert Python Tutorial 啊，这是叫这个名字啊。他这个视频呢，我觉得是讲的有点快的，然后所以一开始没有 Solidity 基础呢，可能需要把 Solidity 从头到尾搞一遍，再来讲这个。这个我学到现在觉得最大的这个问题，Solidity 就是对于我们这种初学最大的问题，
this
它
is
需
what
要
we're going to
有
need. We're going to need the
很好的
bytecode
这个
and the ABI. The
传
ABI
统
we
的后
can
端前端语言基础啊。
I think we should explore a few solutions.
Grammarly suggestions
of course get from this kind of same method here. So to get this, we can do ABI
get ABI
equals compiled soul, same thing, contracts, simple storage.soul, simple storage, and as you can see, we're right here, and then we can just grab this ABI object. ABI. We can even do print ABI, we'll do Python, develop.py, and
你
indeed,
看
our
我们的
ABI is
print
printed.
API 就在
Awesome.
deploy
So now that we have our two main pieces to deploy this, now all we have to do
Deploy
is
the
deploy it.
file.
But the question then becomes is where are we going to deploy it to? Which blockchain are we going to deploy it to? In Remix, when we were first playing around, we were using a JavaScript VM or a fake or a
然后我
simulated
们需
environment.
要
We
下一
actually
个叫
could and we
Ganache
actually
这个软
will
件
learn to
Ganache
deploy this to a testnet.
这个
Because that's going to be the same way that we're going to deploy it to
它
our
是
main.
在本
But before
地
we do that,
做
we
一
should learn how
个
to
区块
deploy
链网
this
络，
on
你就可
a
以在本地
simulated
上测试
environment
了。
or something similar to that JavaScript VM, so it's much faster and easier to test things. And this is where Ganache is going to come to the
Ganache
Ganache is a
Ganache
simulated or a fake
这个软件
blockchain
打开是这
that
样
we can
啊，
actually use to deploy.
然后它这边有一个 Quick Start， 就是快速启动，鼠标左键点一下就行了，它就会模拟出一个区块链环境来啊。你看这个
smart contracts too.
启动以后就是这样啊，这边每一个都有一个地址，还有
Ganache is going to allow
这
us to
是
spin up
私
our
钥
own
啊。
local blockchain.
你可以直接谷歌搜这
And
个
it'll look something like this. Now, the user
GANACHE
interface
就
is
可以
really nice
找到
because it
下载
allows
链
us to
接。
kind of do this one-click blockchain to create our own local blockchain. That means that this blockchain isn't connected to any other blockchain out there, but it'll act like a blockchain. But it'll be a lot faster than us having to interact with a testnet, and we control the entire blockchain.
这个呢，就是一个在本地的链，就是你部署起来更快啊，你不要每个跑到那个 Rinkeby 啊那个测试网上，那个要等。我这个直接点一下就 OK 了啊，仿以太坊的一个小链啊。
Because it's only one node. We're the only node. So Ganache, great way to test things quickly. Now we're going to mainly be working with the user interface, but I'm also going to show you how to work with the Ganache command line. You can really use either one depending on what you want to do, but a lot of the tools actually have built-in Ganache command lines, so it's definitely really useful to learn that as well. So again, Ganache is going to be our simulated environment here. So what we're going to do, once we get into Ganache, we can just go ahead and hit Quick Start. This will automatically upload and get started with our own local fake blockchain. You can even see it gives us some accounts. This should look pretty familiar. It should look very MetaMask-y, right? We have an address here, and each one of these addresses has a private key. In your Ganache, you can go ahead and just click the key and hit Show Keys, and it'll show you the account address and the private key. But of course, these are for development purposes only. Each one of these accounts has a balance associated.
这里面就可以点这个钥匙，就可以显示它的地址和私钥啊。这个私钥没用的，它是假的啊。
A whole lot of other really useful features here. And it even tells us how to connect to this blockchain. And these are the connecting features.
这个是怎么连我们这个本地区块链？这 RPC server 是我们的连接地址啊。这个 network AD 下面就告诉你怎么连我们本地区块链。
That we're going to want to use. Let's learn how to connect to this Ganache blockchain from this user interface first, and then we'll learn how to do the command line version. This is
我们先学怎么通过这个用户界面里面连这个 Ganache， 后面呢学那个 Brownie 的时候，它就是在用我们命令栏启动，在后台都不用看到这个用户界面交互界面了啊。
This is when we finally start working with web3.py. You can just do pip install web3.
现在我们终于要和这个 Web3 这个东西接触了啊！我们先 clear 一下，把这个清除。装 Web3 你要叫 install Web3 pip install Web3 就打这个指令啊，这是把 Web3 给装了。他告诉我都装了啊你没装的话就点一下这个指令啊。OK， 我们 clear 一下啊。
And now we can start working with web3.py. Right at the top, a little confusingly, we're going to do import web3 from web3.
然后我们要在上面把那个 Web3 导入进来啊 ，import Web3 from， 好像是我们先不管，先这样。报错了，应该是 problem。
Whoops, and this should be from web3, import web3. Sorry about that.
From Web3 import 大写啊。讲错了啊，这叫 import from Web3 小写的 Web3 硬写一个啊，没有 problem 啊，这边没有 problem 啊，保存的时候没有 problem。OK。
Now, to connect to this blockchain, we choose what's called an HTTP provider. If we look at this Ganache instance, we have this RPC server, which has this URL, HTTP 0.0.0.854. This is the URL that we're going to use to connect to this blockchain. In Remix, we're actually using our MetaMasks directly to connect to the blockchain. However, we want to connect directly to our simulated, our fake blockchain right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do W3 for connecting to Ganache.
然后接下来我们要做的就是这个，在这里面把这个连接 Web3 啊，连接 Ganache 这个本地区块链啊，做的是啊，把这个 print 不要打印了啊。
W3 equals web3 web3.http
和 W3 等于Web3 WEB3 点 HTTP provider 应该是这个啊，让我看。
provider of HTTP
然后把那个地址打上啊，对吧？啊，就这个，把它复制一下，复制，大写。OK， 你看，WEB3 WEB3 HTTP provider 这么一个东西啊。
0.0.0.0 and it was on port 845.
就是这边有个 RPC server， 把这地址粘上去。
845. Now, with everything that we show you, you're probably going to want to get really familiar with the documentation because even after being a pro, you're going to want to use it more.
如果你不熟的话，你就点那个 W3PY 这个，啊，看这个，这个我就是这个怎么搞，跟那个一些节点啊，这个 Web3 这个东西怎么搞，这个挺麻烦的。你很熟了以后，还经常要搞这个东西，好吧？这个我也不懂，我们回头什么 API 什么的啊，往下深入再说吧啊。
If you want to learn more about other providers, you can go to the providers page of the documentation. The next thing that we're always going to need as well is we're going to need the chain ID or the network ID. What is the ID of this blockchain? And for Ganache, it's 1337. It's supposed to be a funny leet reference. So we'll do chain ID equals
然后把这个 chain ID 打进去，1337，我这个也是啊，chain ID。我算一下啊，chain ID 1337。
1337. Now, we're also going to need an address. An
然
address to
后
deploy
就
from.
是把我们地址打进去啊，比如说这个地址，复制一下。OK， 就这样吧。不知道要不要加引号啊？
We can go ahead and grab one of these fake addresses in here to work with. Similar.
OK， 要加个引号，加个引号。OK， 保存一下，把地址打进去。
Similar to how in Remix, when we were working with the JavaScript VM, we were given a bunch of fake addresses.
我们 Remix 里面也会有很多这个地址嘛，对吧？
We're doing the same thing, but with Ganache. And then we're also, of course, going to want a private key. We need the private key, of course, to sign our transactions.
然后也要私钥，也没有私钥是不能给我们的交易给签名嘛，对不对？我们交易需要私钥才能签名。
Now, just note, whenever
然后你就把我们这个私钥也给粘进去，做一个变量叫 private key， 啊 IVATE 啊，就是 Python 里面定一个变量名，然后引号，然后在这里面点这个钥匙 shell keys， 然后把这个粘进去。然后它这个是，记得在这里面加上0x， 它这边我们默认都用0x 开头的，在这位数才够啊。
Whenever you import a private key in Python, you need to add an OX to the front. Python is always going to look for the hexadecimal version of the private key. Awesome. Now we have all the parameters that we need for interacting with and connecting to our Ganache local chain. It's time to finally deploy our simple storage.sol contract. Let's do it. So to create a contract that we're going to deploy with web3.py, we're going to do simple storage. We're going to call this variable w3.eth.contract. And we're going to give it ABI equals ABI and bytecode equals bytecode. Great. Does this mean?
然后我们就是 correct the contract in Python 啊，最后就是要把这个部署给 Python Python 我也不丢，我以前自学过一段时间，现在忘光了。我们再捡起来吧。Python 也是一个高级语言，都跟英语差不多的啊，跟 Solid 差不多，好吧？所以咱们不用太害怕，英语好就可以了。等于 w3.eth 点 contract ABI 等于 ABI 等于 ABI bytecode 等于 bytecode， 看看还有啥啊？
Mean we've deployed it? Well, no. This just means we have a contract down. So we can do print, simple storage, and you'll see if we run Python.
然后我们再把这个 simple storage 打印出来，好吧？看看刚刚这个是不是正常 print 打印嘛，就把它印出来 simple storage。然后在 terminal 在这边 deploy Python deploy 点 py 已经有了啊 class web3 uts data types 这样
deploy.py.
就
You
是
see we have a new type here. Class web3.utils.datatype.contract. This is another type that if you want to learn more, you should definitely check out the web3.py doc. Awesome. How do we actually deploy this? Well, we need to actually build our transaction. Because again, whenever we interact with the blockchain, whenever we make a state change, and in this case, we'd be deploying a contract, we're going to make a state change. So we first need to build the transaction.
build 这，我们刚刚只是把它打印出来，还有这个sample build the contract 创建这个合约部署的这个交易 transaction 交易用我们的私钥 send transaction 就是签名，就跟我们那个我不知道你们玩小狐狸钱包，它会首先你要做一个动作，你要 confirm 或者 sign 嘛，你要用你的私钥去签它名，证明这个是你本人在弄啊。send the transaction 然后发送这笔交易，把这笔交易发给区块链，让所有节点都能听到你这个本人发送的这笔交易啊。
Sign a transaction and then send a transaction. And to do that, we need to talk about that nonce thing again. Remember way back in our blockchain demo, when we used a nonce to solve the answer to that really difficult mining problem? Well,
nonce 呢，就是说我们每一笔交易都为了避免跟别的冲突嘛，或者是它都会有一个随机数，我们每区块链一笔交易都会有一个 nonce， 叫随机数，来跟着我们这个交易一起 hash 的吧，一起加密的啊。
Well, the definition of nonce is just a word coined or used for just one occasion. And in cryptography, it's an arbitrary number that can be used just once in a cryptographic
这个随机
communication.
数
So
是每次
this
交易
nonce
都
that's used
不
to
一
find
样
the
的。
answer is going to be different from another nonce that we're actually going to need to make our transaction. See, if we look at our MetaMask and we look at our activity, and we look at one of the transactions we've made
你看它
recently,
这每笔交易，每个意思是
if we
看任何
scroll
一笔
down,
交易
we'll
上
see
都是有个
nonce
的啊。
here as well. This
Yeah,
nonce is the
yes.
number of transactions that our account has actually made. Every time we make another transaction, our transaction is hashed with a new nonce. This is what's going on behind the scenes with our transaction. And we need this to send our transaction. We can actually get our nonce by just grabbing our latest transaction count. Get the latest transaction. We can do
所以我们在这里面也要有一个 nonce， 就是这个随机数啊。然后呢，就这 get the latest transaction， 获取最近的。 获得获取最近的交易，然后那建一个变量名为 nonce， 就随机数等于
nonce equals w3.eth.get transaction count, and we'll put in my address. This will give us
它这边就是有一个变量叫 w3 点，这就 w3 简写嘛 ，eth get， 它这边后面还有好多get transaction count， 这有 transaction get transaction transact my address my 这个好，把 block 去掉看看行不行
the number of transactions, and it'll effectively give us our nonce. We can even test it out with a print.
那我们试一下，然后 print nonce 看看是不是有一个随机数 print nonce 这是不是有一个东西然后就 deply 点 pl 把这个 nonce 看，它报错了是不是这个可以看一下。那可能再来一下，不行估计看一下哪里错了。
Python floor.py. We can see that the answer
nonce w3 contract ABI 对 ABI。我们看一下。
answer is 0, because on our local blockchain, this address that we're using hasn't been used before. We can even go to the transactions tab. We can see that there are no transactions.
Get transaction count. 看一下是不是代码？看一下是不是？可以了。我这个 F 这个地址是大写的，应该是小写的你看到没有？这边这个就是 nonce， 就是个0是个随机数。
Transactions that have ever occurred on our local blockchain. Now, to deploy this contract, we need to make a transaction. Remember, everything that we do, every time we change the state of a blockchain, we're going to do it in a transaction. Let's create a transaction object. To do this, we can
然后
do
我们要 这个只是要，然后我们要 build a transaction 3个 transaction and send a transaction。刚刚只是建立一个交易，对不对？build transaction 3 transaction， 然后 send a transaction， 这是一笔交易啊。我们任何一个区块链状态的改变都是个交易啊。
transaction equals symbol storage, which again is this contract object, constructor dot build transaction. Now, as you might have pointed out, our symbol storage.sol doesn't actually have a constructor. Every contract technically has a constructor. This one's is just blank. We're not telling our symbol storage.sol to do anything. We saw back in our fundme example that the fundme example does have a constructor. So now
是这样啊，我们这个 constructor 也就是我们那个任何一个合约的构造函数，它是每个合约都有的，只不过你不写的话，它就代表你这个构造函数是空。构造函数就你一部署的时候可以给一些初始的属性和变量啊，叫构造函数。然后我们就把这个transaction 也弄一下啊，就抄一下。这一部分是比较枯燥，也可以跳过的。我后面因为这个一些开发框架，它都会把你这些底层的这个重复性劳动给弄掉。但是我们还是，我觉得是我们了解一下吧。Summary constructor 点 build build transaction 啊。保存一下啊。
we want to put in some parameters for this transaction. In Web3.py, we always have to give at least a couple of parameters. We always have to give
啊，这里面要给它一些初
chain
始的
ID,
函数啊，
which we already got from above, which is 1337.
比如说啊，等一下啊，比如说我们要有这个 chain ID， 对吧？chain ID， 这应该是，哎呀，然后就是 chain ID 这个。
So we can just do chain ID. We need a from
然后 from 应该就是你这个你部署一个合约，这个地址是从哪开始的，就 from。
address, in this case, my address.
然后就是 my address my。
And then we need a nonce.
然后一个 nonce 就是随机数 nonce， 我们这些都是我们冒号后面就是我们定义的变量啊。但是好像这边我等我找一下笔记啊，还是有一个不只是这样，还有一个东西啊，有一个叫还有一个 gas price， 这个 gas price 我复制一下啊。gas price gas price 这边等于冒号 W3 ETH gas price。Yes， 啊，还有一个这个东西 from my address，好吧？哎，有 problem，我们看一下53行59列啊，这个 OK，没有 problem 啊，是吧？它这个还帮你自动把 format 给变好，W3ETH，没问题吧？Gas price，当前的 gas 费用，
which in our case is just
它
nuts.
这个老版本不需要
Great.
gas price。
Now we have a transaction object. Let's even print this out.
然后我们看看能不能把这个 transaction 给打印出来啊 ，print。你看啊，这个 transaction 打印出来，一堆这个叫啊 value gas chain ID 1337 gas price 这个 from 就是我当前这个地址 nonce 是0 data 这是最后的这个整个 transaction 一个 to blockchain to 到整个区块链上啊。
See what it looks like.
好，我们这个视频到这里，下节课见。